This conference will now be recorded.
We are welcoming Nikki as a lead information developer at Innovative Systems. She's a fellow and past president of the Society for Technical Communication and has more than 20 years of experience writing and designing content for software products in a variety of industries. She has interviewed a number of experts in technical communications, including John Carroll, David Pogue, Kathy Sierra, and David Duarte, and was a guest editor of the all-interview Legends of Technical Communication issue of STC's Intercom magazine. We're excited to have her here presenting this evening. And Nikki, I'll hand it off to you.
Sure. Thanks a lot for that introduction, Paul. I will share my slides.
Let me make you the presenter.
Okay.
Yes. There you go.
Okay. Looks like I can share my screen here, and then I will share my slides. Going into slideshow mode. Here we go. So do you see my first slide, Paul?
I do.
Great. So, well, thanks everyone for coming, and I'm very excited that that worked on the first try. Welcome to the session, and thanks for joining me to discuss how to prepare for a SME interview, conduct it, and then follow up. So as I mentioned, possibly before everyone got here, you could put your questions in the chat, or you could save them for the end. I'm sure that we can just take live questions at the end rather than do it all in the chat. But if you think you might forget it, just put your question right in there. Okay, so as Paul mentioned, my name is Nicky Bleiel, and I have more than 25 years experience as a technical communicator, most of it in the software industry. I've also worked on hardware docs, but that hardware worked in conjunction with software, so most of it in the software industry. And I've interviewed countless SMEs as well as experts in the field of technical communication, such as here's a picture of me interviewing John Carroll, who wrote the Nuremberg Funnel, and Kathy Sierra. She's really a great interview. She wrote the book Badass, Making Users Awesome, among many other things. And David Pogue of the New York Times. He's also on CBS News Sunday Morning. He has written quite a few technical books, and he's spoken at the STC Summit twice. He's been the keynote. So how important is the skill of interviewing SMEs for technical communicators? You're here, so you all know this subject is important, but you're not alone. And I always like to point out that according to the 2019 WritersUA Skills and Technology Survey, 83% of technical communicators surveyed considered interviewing subject matter experts an important skill we need to master in the field of software user assistance. And other top skills in the survey included writing procedures, writing reference information, task analysis, all things that we know are important. Now, an interview has 3 steps. First, you need to prepare, then you need to conduct it, and then you need to follow up. And we're going to discuss all of these steps and how to use the principles of both journalism and technical communication for a successful and productive interview. And we'll also talk about the magic question you can ask that should get you the answers you need about new features, most of the time. So the first step, preparing. Before you write one question, you need to cultivate sources. Now, often a SME will be assigned to you. Someone will say, talk to this person about this, and you should absolutely work with that person. but expanding your circle of subject matter experts will often improve the final product and make it easier to get quick answers to your questions in the future. But SMEs are everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And like a good journalist, you need to cultivate them as sources. Potential SMEs include, but aren't limited to, software developers, business analysts, quality assurance engineers, technical support, product managers, sales. I think I'm naming the whole company, right? And even though this can be a little challenging to arrange and we all always want to do it, it's customers. They're also subject matter experts. All of these folks have a different perspective and all have slightly different information to share. And by the way, SMEs will vary by company. I always like to point out, at some companies, the folks in quality assurance can be one of your best sources. Like they know everything, they know who to ask, they know how everything works. But then you'll go to another company and QA won't be your number one source. It'll be someone on another team. So just remember, it changes from company to company. So don't think it's a static thing. And one bit of advice I like to give, although this always gets me into trouble, is that don't bribe your SMEs with cookies or brownies. You're professionals, they're professionals. Just don't try to bribe people. But I'm not saying you shouldn't bake for folks in your office and your teammates and everything. I'm just noting that it shouldn't be something where it's I brought you brownies so that you give me answers, but I'm all in. And of course, this is not something we could do right now, most of us. So I'm kind of looking forward to the day when I'm in the office and folks are leaving cookies and candy everywhere. So preparing SMEs. Now remember, SMEs want to know what the plan is. I think a lot of times we consider them all knowing and know that when we come to them with questions, they just absolutely know why we're asking the questions and what the answers are going to be used for. So they want to know what the plan is. So even if they don't, the plan will help shape the discussion. So in preparation, share with them your project plan and deadlines, what final deliverables are planned, the audience for the deliverable, and how the interview will be conducted. And they also may need to be told what the responsibilities are. Some honestly don't know. And at the end of this talk, I provide links to a few videos I found that explain what the responsibilities of a SME are. And you could actually share them. They're very short and they're kind of fun, and it might be helpful, especially for newer folks at the office. So also let them know, if you plan to record the interview, an estimate of how much time the interview will take, and if they don't know it, what your review process is for the content, because they're not getting off the hook after answering a few questions. You're probably going to need them for reviews. So let them know that there will be reviews and you have a process. Now, preparation is important, and I love squirrels partially because they're always prepared. Don't walk into an interview without your questions prepared. Review all the product related information, the release plans, the blueprints, internal collaboration tools, if you're using Jira or GitHub, specifications, emails. If you work in an agile shop, you might have user stories. Review all of that. Also research both the subject and the SME if you don't know them very well. Find out what their job is, little bits of information like that. And if you have the software, try it out. It will help you write better and probably even more questions than you wouldn't have written in the first place. All of this seems obvious, but Sometimes folks tend to go in interviews saying, hey, I know what this feature is, I'll just wing it. And a lot of times winging it's really bad because you waste a lot of time and you jump around, and that's not ideal. So also take lots of notes while you're researching. That way it'll come in, the notes will come in handy if the SME asks why you're asking the question. And also just for your reference, you'll know where, like if you jotted down a fact about a particular part of the feature and you say, oh, I saw this in this GitHub issue, then you'll know where you saw it, because a lot of times you end up forgetting and then you're digging around when the SME says, hey, where did you get that? You don't have to dig around again. Now, when writing questions, keep in mind one of the tenets of journalism, the 5 W's and 1 H. So who, what, when, where, why, and how. So a few sample questions, for example, who would use this feature? You know your audience, but you will get insight into who the SME thinks the audience is for this content. What are the prerequisites? And I don't mean things like the software version and the operating system. That stuff should be in the specs. What are the specific feature prerequisites? How do you set it up? Things like that. When would the users use this feature? When shouldn't they use it? Why should they use this feature? And that's often conceptual information. And then the H, the how, and the where combine to explain the task. So the how and the where. You may have figured it out by testing the software, but go through the steps. And when you're writing questions, write open-ended questions to try and avoid yes or no answers. Most people, when you're interviewing them about things, tend to want to answer yes or no, and you need to write things so that they can't get away with it. And this method works its way down the journalistic inverted pyramid, meaning that anything at the beginning is the most important, and as you go gradually down to the bottom, things at the bottom could be cut out if needed. So when writing questions, always consider, what would the user ask? You're their representative. We always talk about this as technical communicators. We represent the user. So think about what your user personas would ask. Now, while technical communicators should use the 5 W's and 1 H, we also need to be, I think, the 2 P's, persistent and prepared. Be persistent, know what you need and go for it. And as I've already mentioned, prepared. Prepare the SME, do your research, and prepare your questions. And now that you have, so magically now we have all of our questions written, our SME is prepped, and the interview is scheduled. You need to take the time to get your questions in order before the interview. The flow is really important because the interview will go more smoothly if you aren't jumping around from topic to topic. And this is especially important if you promise to send the questions in advance. So you want to have them in the proper order in that case also. So now the day of the interview has arrived, it's time to sit down and conduct it. Now you can see my little, the little illustration I have here of 2 folks sitting around talking and being interviewed. And I'm actually going to switch out this photo because it's a little more accurate for the times we live in. Not just because of the fact that we're all not in most of us aren't in our offices as we were before, but also because doing things virtually, we're on distributed teams anyway, where people don't have a lot of time to maybe sit down. So, we're going to be doing more and more interviews virtually. And as soon as you figuratively or literally sit down, acknowledge their expertise and share yours. Just give a quick little background so they know. It's like, oh, you're a technical communicator, you've been doing this a long time, you know what you're doing. People have different styles. Some people are very brusque, some people are very talkative, some folks are formal, some are informal. Try to adjust to their style and don't be intimidated. The interview should be a dialogue, not a monologue. And really listen attentively. Are they revealing paths you hadn't considered or a use case you didn't know about? Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you're surprised. If their body language is kind of closed off, which is a little harder virtually, take a minute to make them more comfortable. And if they have their camera off, ask them to please turn it on because that really makes it seem one-sided when both of you when one person doesn't have their camera on. And also follow up on all your questions. Don't assume you're going to have another chance to follow up later. Did anyone start? I guess I could look in the chat for this. Did anyone start watching old Columbo episodes during the pandemic? He was famous for always asking just one more thing. So he didn't let people get away. And if the SME you're talking to can't confirm a fact, ask them who or what can. You know, where can I find that? Who could I talk to? Encourage whiteboarding. Online, you could use tools like Miro or Mural, whatever your company has. And you could take screenshots for your records or obviously just save those files. And pay attention to the time and stick to the planned meeting time. It shows respect for your SME to not go over time. If they're cool with going over, great, but you know, make the attempt to end at the correct time. And one trick to confirm an answer, summarize their statements back to them and then say, what I hear you saying is this, and then summarize and then see if they agree with you. That's always a great way to make sure that you understood what they said and you have it all down. Now, I see in the chat that Trisha said she loved Columbo. Yeah, Columbo's awesome. So during the interview, and this sort of might be a Columbo reference too, take the SME down the happy path first. Get the best case scenario, then the exceptions. You know, when you're talking about a feature, many SMEs want to often share the potential problems first. They want to say, if they do this one edge case, this will happen, or this might happen if you do this. You need to get that information, but you know, first try to get them to just go through it start to finish. Here's the way it's set up. Here's what they need to do, all those things. Go down the happy path. Now, if you're conducting a remote interview, which as I mentioned is it's probably going to be the way it is from now on for many people, have everyone turn on your video so that you could read their expressions. It's really helpful. And this is David Pogue, who I mentioned earlier. He's a writer for the New York Times and he's written many, many books. He does a lot of television about tech topics. And here's his cat, who's named Wilbur. And it's always fun when the cats join the interview too. Now, this is the one question you should always ask SMEs. I call it the magic question. How do you think this feature will help the user? It's very clarifying for everyone, and you will hopefully get the thought process behind the feature, because that's one of the most important things you need to understand about a feature, like why are we doing this? Now let's take a minute to talk about the opposite of the magic question. And these are certain words you should avoid to keep the interview positive and productive. And this is from an article called Words Matter by Shauna Vaughn. And I have the link to it in the slides, which I will send to be posted. So all the links will be available to you. One thing Shauna mentions is you can be off-putting. Try we, because it implies a partnership, it implies your team, not what would you like to do. Instead, say, what should we do? How should we proceed? And no, combined with a negative tone, is considered not constructive. So instead of no, say yes and, not no, we can't do that, it's out of scope. Instead, say yes, we can do that. Let's look at the current scope and see what adjustments we can make. Using the word problem or issue without a solution can sometimes be counterproductive. No one likes to hear problems without a solution. Well, maybe some people, but many people. Don't say the problem with that is, say my concern with that is. Always have a proposed solution in mind. Maybe don't say there's a problem, say we have a situation. These are just kind of, I think these are general tips, and of course they're cultural. In some cultures, it might be the opposite. It might be considered wrong to try to, or not acceptable to couch things in this way. But this, I think if you read this article, see what you think. I think she makes some good points. Now, I'll admit proactive interviewing, I'll admit that I kind of made this term up, but usually when we set up SME interviews, they're about new features or initiatives. They're about, what's in the next release. So we're always reacting to the situation. But we don't have to wait for a new feature or release. We could be proactive and schedule a SME interview about an existing feature or concept in the docs that you think needs to be improved. In this case, give the SME a good starting point. Send them a specific section of the docs with a list of your concerns and suggestions for improvements. Ask if they agree. Many SMEs are really glad to help you with this kind of work. And if they don't think, and I've had this happen, where they didn't think the feature I mentioned or what I sent them was problematic. In that case, ask them if they have another suggestion. Is there other content that could be improved? Now, it's a reality that there are some SMEs you will not get one-on-one time with ever, or here's another thing that's really common. There are so many subject matter experts on a project that you can't set up an interview with them all. It would take forever. In that case, you need to get your questions answered in other ways. And I think a lot of you are probably in this same boat. I call these what I mini informal interviews, asynchronous interviews. I used Slack and GitHub as examples here, but there are many messaging apps and issue tracking systems we all use. So when you're interviewing people by Slack, GitHub, email, however you want to do it, in all truthfulness, try to do this kind of work within issues, because then you have a record of it. I mean, email's a record, but it's just often a different system. So try to keep things as together as you can, like make your own policy about it. If someone sends you an email when you ask them in GitHub, for example, or a Jira issue, make sure and move it there, and then, make a note of when you received the email and from who, so it's in there. So write succinct, clear questions. Avoid asking questions that have already been answered elsewhere. I've seen so many issue tickets where people start asking questions that have already been answered earlier in the thread, like, you need to take the time and read it. And you might need to reiterate that, oh, above, someone said this, is that correct? But just not even acknowledging that someone already answered it is really annoying to subject matter experts. So take a look. If it's already been answered, work with that answer, whichever way makes the most sense. Include links when you're asking the questions to related issues or information, or you're probably going to get that link back as an answer. you know, I can't think of how many times somebody said, oh, I need to know X, Y, and Z. And then somebody said, look here. And you'd already seen that. The answer wasn't there. And that's why you're asking. So make sure and include the link. Say, I already looked here, link. So it's not there. So where else might it be? Could you answer it? And always ask who might have more information or where you could find it. And try not to make it, you know, try not to ask long lists of questions because it will overwhelm people. Just try to be very specific. So I think this is the way most of us, and we could talk about this at the end, most of us are getting answers. We're not getting doing a lot of long interviews with people anymore. We are asking questions through these other means and trying to track it all. So now the interview is over and we need to follow up. So there's a little housekeeping you should do. You should thank the SME via email or Slack or whatever you use at your office. And if this is something that would help the subject matter expert, you know, copy their manager in. If that's something that their manager specifically assigned them to do it and they're going to want to know that they did it, you know, copy them in. Ask the subject matter expert if that's necessary. Make sure to mention that you look forward to working with them on the next phases of the project because that reminds them that we're not done yet, reviews are coming and I'm going to need you. And of course, the next phase will be writing, followed by the subject matter review, expert reviews of your content. Now, make sure your review process records final approvals. I admit that's a completely different talk that could take 45 minutes or more on its own, but just wanted to throw that out there that make sure your process handles that. And after the release, if you're in an agile shop, this should be pretty familiar, but have a retro with your team. At the retro, you should review your process, share successes and any issues or problems with the entire team and management, and also suggest improvements because that's the time to do it, and you will be able to maybe improve the way this whole workflow works at your company. Now, since this is such a rich topic, I've gathered several slides of resources for you, and as I said, I'll send the PDF of these slides so that they can be posted for you folks. And you may recognize some of the names on these lists. These are additional articles. And I also have a link to that skills and technology survey from 2019 WritersUA. And there are a few videos here also, the ones from the SME perspective. The last two videos, they cover how to be a subject matter expert, and they're the ones I talked about earlier. And lastly, I have links to some interviews I've done with several TechCom luminaries, as well as a link to the all interview issue of STC Intercom. That was a lot of fun, and I think you know, you could read the whole thing. It's out there, and I think there'll be at least one interview that you will enjoy. So I thank you so much for coming, and I thank you know both chapters for inviting me, and I hope you learned a few things you didn't know before about interviewing SMEs. And that is George Takei of Star Trek was in Pittsburgh, and I met him, and that's my picture with him, and I use it every chance I get because that was really fun. He's a very nice guy, by the way. So I will, I guess we could take Catherine, Paul, what should we do? Should we take live questions or look at the chat or?
Yeah, we can take some questions.
Doesn't
look like there are any in the chat right now.
I have to see. I saw that some chat things were flying by. I'm just trying to make the chat window a little bit bigger so that I can. Oh,
Yeah.
there's like some Columbo. I really set something. I really got people thinking about Peter Falk. So, but no, does anyone have any? I'll look at that. But in the meantime, does anyone have any questions? You could just turn on your microphone and jump in.
Yeah, I had a question. I just put it in the chat actually. It's about how do you successfully multitask, take notes, have the interactions, keep the conversation going, effectively. So multitasking is my question.
Yeah, it's kind. I mean, when you get to do a live interview, whether you're talking to someone on Zoom or GoToMeeting, or you're actually talking to them live. I mean, I actually tend to not type answers, but write them down and then type them. But it just depends on the way you like to do it. It is hard because you have to sort of keep talking while while they're you're trying to keep them talking, right? So sometimes I just ask them, like, if I need to get it down, I'll just say, hey, just wait 1 second and I'm going to get this down. Most folks are fine with that, and then they'll stop talking so that way you could get it down without missing anything. So that would be my suggestion. Just kind of be honest with folks and say, give me a second to write this down because I want to make sure and get it and not miss anything. So does that help?
Yeah,
I put a
yeah,
question. Oh, go ahead, Scott.
yeah. No, I think that's great. It can sometimes just take practice to, speak up and
Yeah,
tell someone that.
I mean, yeah, it's hard because they are doing you a favor and you're telling them to wait, but I think they understand because they want you to get it down too. They don't want to do this over again. So I think that kind of makes them happy
Yeah.
that you're saying, hey, I need to take a minute, give me a sec.
I found that with Zoom calls or, whatever media, that it's helpful to, especially if you're on video and you're looking down because you're taking notes, to just, I'll mention it that, I'm taking notes here so they
Yeah,
know that I'm not like disengaged. I'm, just got my attention elsewhere. I have to look down to write.
exactly. I'm not
Not looking at the
ignoring
phone,
you.
taking notes.
Yeah, it's like, I'm not ignoring you. I'm here.
So I threw
Eh,
a question in chat right before and after Scott's question. So the great talk, it's one of those talks where I found myself kind of nodding all the way through and saying, oh, yeah, yeah. No, I always forget to do that too. And but so the thing I'm thinking about is, you described such an ideal process of such an organized system, well-organized companies. But, I work on a lot of projects that are pretty ad hoc. Managers that aren't organized and are, have a better vision than a process. And so that's kind of like, I was you just mentioned it. It's like, well, afterwards, have a retrospective and what you can do better and like build your process. But what if, you're in teams that do more ad hoc work, don't work very well out of system, or there's 3 systems, and what are the tips or suggestions you have to encourage that? That makes sense?
to encourage more of a system, or just to
Yeah,
try to
how do you encourage
stay
process? How do
organized?
you encourage that retrospective? I think that's so important. You mentioned, you highlighted it there at the end. What went well, what didn't? What if you're in a situation that doesn't really, support that? How do you, what are some tips on, encouraging that when you're in an
Well,
ad hoc, unstructured process?
so they're not really using Agile
No.
or anything. Yeah, that's I do admit it's it's easier when you're in an agile shop, and even if they, you know, obviously if you're in an agile shop and you're not doing retros, or people are forgetting to do, I find a lot of times in agile shops people just get so busy that you kind of skip the retro, so you got to kind of encourage it and just say, hey, we didn't have a retro the last release, we should really have one this release. But yeah, if you're not in agile, retros are tough. It might be that it's just something. Here's would be my suggestion. If there's a group meeting you have every week, or there's a group meeting, like just take your chance. You know what I mean? Like don't wait for the end of it. Maybe bring things up at whatever group meetings you have. Maybe you have one weekly, maybe you have one every other week. And just say, hey, we're having a little bit of an issue with this. Here's my suggestion about what we could do. The more people that are there, the better. So that would be my suggestion when you're not in an agile shop. You got to take your shot when you get it. And when you
Take your shot, work again.
when you go into it and you're saying, here's the problem, but here's what I think would work, that usually is easier for people to swallow than just, hey, this doesn't work. Does that sound like it could work for you?
Yeah, I just wanted to hear you.
Oh, sorry, the audio, I'm not hearing you very well.
It's probably my computer. It's been going in and out ever since I got it. But no, thank you. I just wanted to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I mean, everybody's, especially when you're, I mean, nothing goes, I'll just say about being organized. I mean, I take a lot of notes. Like I kind of like Microsoft OneNote, but whatever you like. But I just keep tab after tab of notes of who I talked to, where I found things, the status of, because you're usually working on a few different projects at the same time. And I just keep notes on all of it, because really you're juggling, and also about getting these answers. I mean, you're juggling. It's not, I mean, yeah, I'm talking about sort of an ideal situation where, oh, I got the interview with the SME, I got organized, I talked to them. But in reality, you're talking to a lot of different people, and you're juggling all of these discussions people are having in Slack. If you have Slack or a Slack-like thing, Teams, all these things. Some of it's an email. I'm finding less and less stuff is an email. Before, like 90% of everything would be an email. I mean, you really need to keep track of a lot of things and a lot of different pieces of content. I don't want to say people are giving you content, they're giving you answers, but I keep a lot of notes just to try to keep it straight throughout the day. Let's see, I'm looking in the chat, but does anybody have any other questions? Oh, that's a good point. Amy mentions, split screen and using OneNote, next to Zoom. Very true. You could let them see what you're writing down as you're writing it. I think that's a great idea. Yeah, recording the interviews. Also, Kim mentions this, recording the interviews, that way you have it. Yeah, lots of great suggestions here.
I have sort of a unique scenario where I'm trying to sort of get a user to provide me a business definition for a business glossary that we're updating, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not just the definition, but it's also like the context and the business usage, as well as some other fields. So it can be a sort of a challenging task. Just wondering if you had, when you're going for something specific, like, just give me the information that I need to populate this glossary, how would you go about maybe doing that?
Yeah. Oh, so you're trying to get it from a user.
Yeah, we would call them like a data steward
Yeah.
or a SME. They can be a SME.
Oh, I was gonna say I'm working on a glossary myself right now. Those are tough.
Yeah, it can be.
Yeah, it's a lot of, I mean, one of the things that I've done, and you know, that we tend to do this too with just writing content, like, you know, work with what we've got, and then when people are reviewing, sometimes more comes to light, sometimes not. But sometimes with glossaries, what I've done is just actually written the definition to the best of my ability, and then sent it for review. Some folks just really need something to tear apart, and sometimes that will help. You know, you're not making them start with a blank slate.
Right.
But of course, you could then say, hey, if all this is bad, just, you know, you could throw it all away. I'm not, you know, that sort of thing. So
Yeah,
I know that takes time. I'm just saying it is one methodology for trying to get folks to, because some folks are just really, I mean, and of course, as technical writers, we have to get over this more quickly than others, but some people just have a huge fear of a blank page.
totally agree. Yeah, I try to do my due diligence ahead of time and like, have a draft definition and some of the other fields filled out, and then, I'll kind of ask them, hey, does this sound right? Or if not, help me understand how it can sound better or the context of it. And we're speaking to maybe different data stewards under different business areas, so there may be different flavors as well. And it's my job to kind of corral the different responses, but ultimately to best sort of capture everybody's definition to one. We can add business usage and color, but it can be challenging from that aspect.
Oh, I mean, you know, as I said earlier, you know, about the, you know, and I mean, this is life, but like different companies, different SMEs will be your go-tos. It's like different projects are, you know, also, you know, what do I want to say? Different. It's like at some places, like you could go years at different companies and never have to worry about a glossary that needs like that level of detail. But then, you know, we're on, both of us are on projects now where it's like, hey, the glossary is really important. Or, I mean, so yeah, that's part of what I think is really fun about uh, technical communication and tech writing and everything. It's, you know, it's always something new and always a lot to learn, and you know, it keeps it interesting.
For sure. Thank you.
So, oh, you're welcome, and thanks for that question. I see that Kim said, do any of the rest of you run into SMEs who basically don't want to draw their line in the sand? Can you explain that, Kim? I don't.
Yeah, there's the microphone. Yeah, thank you. And of course, I'm in the instructional design and training field, which is a little different, but it's a lot the same as
Mhm.
I'm still a tech comm person.
Yeah, you're
But
gathering.
we we run into sometimes projects, and we're an external vendor where the client, like, you know, they haven't decided what browser people are going to be using to access this software tool, or they're maybe they're in the process of changing their business process flow, and they want us to create training, but they haven't really decided what the new flow is yet. And it can. I just wondered if anybody else ran into that. Of course, you can't write something that doesn't exist, but sometimes we end up almost helping them to figure it out. Does anybody have any tips or insights on that? Thanks.
See if anyone else has any answers on that one. I would agree that sometimes, well, sometimes you're basically what you're saying is like sometimes you're just forcing the issue. It's just kind of like, hey, we have to tell them
Yeah,
something. But
yes, but politely, you know, kind of
yes,
more like encouraging, not like, why aren't you making a decision?
right. I mean, I mean, I've definitely, and you know, this is where, I want to hear what other people have to say, but I'd say here's where like issue tracking software is really great because, you know, you could open an issue for it and say, you know, just outline it all. It's like, hey, people need to know what browsers are supported, and we know we have problems with this, but you know, you could just like put it all in there, and you know, that kind of makes it a task that somebody has to do. I mean, they could ignore it, but so that's always
I
helpful. But I agree that you know, you don't want to be mean about it. It's just like, hey, we need to talk.
Hi, this is Rob.
Hi, Rob.
I I've kind of been corresponding a little bit here in the chat, but I just wanted to add, you know, you said helping them to figure it out, and I immediately said, yes, that's exactly what we need to do, to help them figure it out. A lot of the time, the people that I talk to don't necessarily know what they want. All they can tell me is after I've finished or produced something is what they don't like about it, and then I fix it, you know, and you go through iterations. But a lot of the time they just don't know, so you have to probe. I don't know of any other way to do it, and being able to tease that out of them, understand that they're in trouble in some way, and they don't know what to do, and they're hoping you have the answer for them. You know, that is I think it's a big part of it. You know, that's why they're paying for your services in a
Yeah.
sense. I mean, that's the way I look at it.
Well, and sometimes you're bringing the right people together too, because sometimes you will, you know, as I said, for example, you'll talk to the QA person and say, hey, you know, using this example of supported browsers, which is a really simple one, but yeah, I agree, it comes up. Uh, and just say, hey, what are, you know, I need to document this. And they'll say, oh, well, you know, there's this issue. And, you know, this person said, you know, you'll get like some backstory. And then you kind of have to like bring those parties together, right? You have to say, oh, I heard that, you know, I mean, it's something you could put in an issue or talk to someone about, but it's in, you know, like part of what we also do is kind of like bring these folks together because we're talking to everyone and sometimes they're not talking to each other. And, you know, and some people don't want to like, they don't necessarily want to fight a particular battle. Like they might have a lot of things they need to get done and things they need answered, and like the thing you're asking about is like number 25 on their list, but to someone else, including the customer, you know, hey, this is something that we need to get settled. So by bringing the, you know, the correct people together to talk about it, sometimes that helps too. So I mean, definitely helps. So yeah, I also think it's interesting when you find things in old issue, and this is something we need to tease out too, like you'll find in an old issue or in older documentation something somebody mentioned, and you're just not taking it at face value. You know, you're just like, I don't know if that's right. And so you start asking around, and you know, some people might say to you, well, it's in the documentation. But then you will eventually and you know, come to someone who said, you know what, we fixed that at some point and the documentation didn't get updated, or um, that wasn't quite right in the first place, that kind of thing. So that's you know, it's interesting to have to go in and take something that's already there and start asking questions about it. It's not just about, new features all the time. It's about making sure that older information is also correct. And, that's, you're asking a lot of questions, and you're asking about something that some folks might think was settled.
I agree with you, Nikki. I've had so many cases where training and documentations, probing of that information brings out things that have not been addressed properly. For one example is a particular product or something called by 3 different names, or a process or something like that, and you have to get everybody to decide on one or something like that.
Right.
And that's a pretty easy example, but yeah, I mean, it brings out everything into the open, because at that point you're saying, I want to make sure that the people that are reading this documentation or taking this training are getting the right information. So what is the right information?
Right. I agree, and oftentimes, like, say you're working on 3 products, say, like you just said, 3 products that are related, but maybe the different folks who work on them are just a little, like you said, terminology, really basic terminology could be a little different between them, and it's like, we want to smooth that over and make sure that, from the customer perspective, we're all talking the same language. And as you said, that's a simple example, but there's, that could happen with much bigger issues than terminology. I am looking at the chat.
Seems like we have a lot of comments. Are there any other questions for Nikki?
I was going to say, I see Trisha's note about creating graphics. They just don't know what they want until they see what they don't want. Yeah, yeah, graphics are an interesting problem because they are very time consuming. So redoing them, yeah, takes a lot of time. Sometimes you almost feel like you want to sketch, and I mean, and really, I don't know what I think it varies obviously by the product and the company and everything else, but really putting a lot of graphics into your documentation is really, it's not only time consuming, but hard to update each release for little changes. Like, some folks will think it's fine if you have a screen, say you have a screen capture in your documentation, and from one release to another, some field change, but it was a small thing. But really what that screen capture is illustrating has nothing to do with that little change. And some folks will be fine with, like, hey, don't update that. That little part has nothing to do with it, But then some folks will be like, oh, every screen capture has to be exactly what it is right now. And it's kind of like, I'm very strategic about screen captures and other illustrations anymore. I don't want to use them unless they're absolutely necessary, because the upkeep of them, and then sometimes when you really look at it, I know we're not talking about SMEs anymore, but is it really needed? So I'd rather have some high quality graphics that really help explain something than just, screen cap kind of thing. Still reading, but any more questions?
You mentioned about like that pyramid, about asking like the important questions
Mm-hmm.
sort of in the beginning. Like, do you really feel that there is sort of like, I don't know, like if you didn't go that route, if you ask the easy ones first, like is it going to alter the success of the interview, or what are your thoughts?
Oh, I was just with the inverted pyramid. That's more of a that's more of a, like, writing concept that you always want to write so that the most important stuff's first. and that as you successively go down, the stuff at the bottom could be cut. But no, it's more about that. The inverted pyramid's more about writing than
Oh,
asking questions. So yeah, I just, as long as you ask the questions in some sort of logic order, so, so it doesn't sound like you're jumping around willy-nilly, that's fine. But the I do like to tell folks in talks about some of the principles of journalism, because so many of them are useful in TechCom. So any more questions, folks? I know it's getting, let's see, it's not getting too late, but still, I know everybody's had a long day and it's cold.
Any other last questions?
Yeah, I had one. Hi, Nikki. This is Kaustuv. First
Hi.
of all, thank you for the wonderful session, and your presentation was amazing with more pictures and less words. So that really helped me concentrate more on what you were talking rather than reading what's on the slide. So
Thank
my
you.
question was, do you think it's a good idea to let the SMEs know about what you have researched so far and tell them what the missing piece of information is that I'm looking for so that we can concentrate on that part more?
I think that's fine. It's, when you're asking, as I said, my example of providing the link when if you're asking the question online, like in an issue, I totally agree. It's like you need to let them know that you've done your homework, and and then they know that you've seen it, to say, oh, I've read this and I looked at the use cases, and yeah, I think that's perfectly fine. Because that way they know you've looked at it, and they know that that you've done your research and your homework. And if they still say it's there, then you could open it up and say, well, let's look together and see where it is.
Right. Yeah.
Because sometimes you do find that like anything, folks will look at it and say, oh, you're right, that's not in there. That's important, we need to add that.
Yeah, right. Like I asked this question because by asking this, we kind of restrict ourselves to the limited questions. Sometimes, if we let the SMEs open up themselves, we may end up getting more information.
Well, I agree. I mean, you do want to let them have it. That's why, I said the question, how do you think this will help the user? You want to ask those kind of open-ended questions. But when you're trying to get like very specific facts, which I think is part of what you're talking about, like if you need to know very specific things, and those things should be elsewhere, like I said, in a use case, in an issue, in an epic, whatever, then it doesn't hurt to point out
Right. Yeah.
that, that these things were not I could not find them in these places. I don't think
Right.
that's cutting them off or anything, because that would be a case where you're asking for very specific facts, whereas when you ask more open-ended questions, you want to let them go, because really in those cases you're usually looking for more conceptual information, and also more their thoughts about the feature. And folks will often go off then and tell you about, oh, and this database and that, and these might be things that you had no idea.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so I think it's a balance, is
Right.
what I'm saying. It's like sometimes you need to, you need to point these things out, and sometimes you just need to let them talk.
Right.
So I
Yep.
hope that helps.
Yep. That really helps. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, I think everybody is starting to, we have some folks dropping off, and I know it's been a long night. So
Sure.
what do you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah, so I'll just close it out this evening. So thank you for this wonderful discussion and insightful presentation. And we thank you, Nikki, for presenting, and then all of you for attending. The session has been recorded, so the Ohio STC chapter will send an email out to all of you with the email that you registered for the event with that recording. Thank you, everyone, and have a great evening.
Yeah, thanks everyone. It was great talking to you. Have a good
Thanks
night.
so much. Thanks,
Thank you.
Nikki.
Okay,
Bye.
thanks.
Bye.
Bye.